Good morning. I'm Rochelle Baltuck, Director of Broward County March of the Living. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third program in our monthly speaker series. It is our goal to continue to bring informative and interesting topics regarding the Holocaust to you. Today, we welcome Mary Eckstein, born in Budapest, Hungary, and Rosette Goldstein, born in Paris, France, who became best friends. They will share with us their completely different testimonies, discuss life before the Holocaust, surviving, and their positive outlook today during COVID. The discussion will be moderated by Ronit Edrich, Director of the Southern Region March of the Living. Please place your questions in the chat, and Ronit will try to get everything covered during the program. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mary and Rosette, for joining us this morning. I appreciate you both waking up so early and speaking with us today. As Rochelle mentioned in her introduction, you are both from different countries and have different Shoah experiences. As I ask each of you a question, I'll give you each an opportunity to respond individually so our audience can hear from each of you. So Mary, I'm going to start with you. Can you please share with us what your immediate family looked like before the war?
Hello. I was born in Budapest, Hungary. Middle class family. I was an only child. My mother was working. She was a working woman. She was a dressmaker. And my father was working for a textile company. And I had aunts and uncles and a grandmother living in Budapest. My mother's family lived in another town named Eger. And my grandmother had 5 brothers and sisters, who in turn had their own families. And we saw them quite often. I went to a Jewish school. I'm a second grade dropout, because when I got to second grade, education was finished for Jewish children. We lived in an apartment building that had catwalks running all around. Everybody knew everybody, most of us were Jewish, and it was like living with an extended family. All my friends were Jewish, and I had a reasonably satisfying life for an 8-year-old. In Hungary, the Shoah started very late, even though my father, with other Hungarian men, Jewish men, were taken to forced labor in 1942. We were not actively persecuted until 1944, when Germany needed Hungary. I didn't see my father after 1942 very much because he was away, but my life was reasonably well. We had air raids, and so that was kind of scary for a little kid. But other than that, until 1944, I had a reasonably satisfying life for a child.
So Mary, I'm gonna stop you there so we can talk a little bit about your wartime experiences after we hear from Rosette. Rosette, can you also share with us a little bit about what your immediate family looked like before the war, and then we'll come back and talk about your wartime experiences after.
Well, what can I tell you? What did they look like? We were normal.
Mary, I'm gonna stop you.
Oh, it's Rosette. Sorry about that.
I'm going to go to Rosette. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So Rosette, can you share with us a little bit about what your immediate family looked like before the war?
Well, I was born in 1938. So things were pretty bad then, and most of my family had scattered wherever they could find a way of leaving. I had my father and my mother's mother lived in Paris at the time. My father had joined the French army, and I had one aunt and uncle and cousins in Paris. This was the eldest sister of my father. And that was the family. as I say, the others had already scattered. Originally, they all came from Poland, from Lodz. They went all to Berlin, Germany for a better life. And of course, that didn't happen. One aunt went to Cuba, one uncle to Brazil. My grandfather, my father's father, and the eldest son went to what was then Palestine. And that is basically the family that I had. There really was no one else. And my memories start when I was very young. And as I physically did not really know or remember my aunt and uncle in Paris or my cousins. And of course, later on, they were taken and sent to Auschwitz and perished there. So my memories of family are really not good.
No. Thank you, Rosette. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that part with us. Mary, I'm going to pick up with you in 1944. In 1944, the Jews of Budapest were forced to live in a ghetto. Some Jews were able to obtain a safe pass that was issued by the Swedish and Swiss governments, led by the heroic efforts of Raoul Wallenberg. Can you share with us your experiences during this time? And were you and your family able to obtain one of the safe passes?
Well, it was Raoul Wallenberg and Karl Lutz, who was the Swedish ambassador. They managed to make a deal with Eichmann, who came to Budapest on March 18, 1944, to settle the Jewish question of the Hungarian Jews. He did a very good job because from March 18th until June, at the end of June, the only Jews left in Hungary were the ones who lived in Budapest. So for the Budapesti Jews, the plan was that they should go to the ghetto, and at one point, all the Budapesti Jews will be in the ghetto, and at one point, the ghetto will be blown up. Raoul Wallenberg and Karl Lutz arranged with Eichmann that the Swiss and the Swedish government will issue safe passes, Schutzpasses, to those who can get them, and you could get those. And then they would rent apartments all over the city that will be under the Swiss or the Swedish protection. And those people living there were supposedly the subject of the Swiss or the Swedish government, and therefore the Hungarian Nazi party, the Arrow Cross, had no jurisdiction over it. Of course, it didn't work out that way. So in October 1944, this is a shortened version of what happened to me because I have unlimited time. And my mother was able to get a Schutzpass, and on October 23rd, we left home to look for an apartment. While we were on the street, we were captured by the Arrow Cross and attached to a march going out of the city. We marched all afternoon to the brick factory. The brick factories were used all over Hungary as demarcation points for deportations. We were there for a week, and I just have to very quickly to give you an idea how my mother was when they escorted us into a shed. My mother parked me in a corner. She went over to the Hungarian policeman guarding us and begged him to let us go. And of course, he didn't let us go. But the week we spent in the brick factory, every morning he would take us and escort us to another shed. And then we would find out where we were the day before. People were already taken away. So he did save our life. After a week, the children were separated, and we were marched back to Budapest, and suddenly an air raid came, and they dispersed us in the neighboring Jew houses. I didn't tell you about that. That's where the Jews were supposed to live before they moved into the ghetto. And there was a German woman there who took the children home. One by one, all night she was walking with them. It was very dangerous. She took me to the place where my aunt, who lived with us, found a temporary shelter. It was an air raid shelter in one of the safe house buildings. And then about 3 days later, my mother came. And then we found a place in a safe house, in an apartment. It was a 3-bedroom apartment, about, 70, 80 people there. I know at night you couldn't walk because people were sleeping all over the apartment on the floor. I don't remember how we were fed. I know that I was very hungry and very scared this period. And one day my mother had to be really desperate to do this. There were 3 of us little girls, 8-year-olds, and our mothers took the yellow star off from our coat, and we went out to buy food. I remember at one time, my mother sent me to the neighbors. There were other people than Jews living in that building, and to ask for food. And the unexplainable fact is that our janitor, where we used to live, and his wife were Aerocross people, Nazis. And yet she came every week with a basket of food. And I'm convinced that if she didn't bring us the food, we probably would have starved. I really don't know how the other people in the building fed themselves, but we were close to starving. And then in the beginning of December, the Aerocross came and they took the woman away. My mother was not taken. My aunt was taken. My mother wasn't taken because we had a shtick going. She would lie down in bed, that she was sick, and I was her caregiver. And as the Aerocross man came into the room, I was just about handing her a glass of water. And it worked. They left her there. It was very fortunate. Usually they shot people who were sick. And then a few weeks later, they came back and they took the rest of the people, most of the people, to the ghetto. Again, my mother and I, we did our little play acting and we were left there. And I don't know what the other people did who were left in the apartment. And then the end of January, when liberation came, my father came to take us. And then we found out that my grandmother and her whole family was taken and killed. They murdered everybody who lived in that town. And then we did, my father, I don't know, do you want me to talk about what happened after liberation?
We're going to get to the part after liberation in a little bit, but I wanted to talk about your wartime experience, and I thank you for sharing that aspect of us, of where you were, right, where you were during this point in time. So now I'm going to switch over to Rosette, and you have a really different experience during the war. Obviously, you weren't in Hungary, and things happened a lot faster in France than they did in Hungary. So Rosette, can you share with us, you were can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like? What do you recall? And who were you with during that time period?
Well, what happened was that in 1940, France and Great Britain lost the war to Germany, to the Nazis. They came into France, and France immediately started collaborating. And unfortunately, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in France. My father, who was in the army, was let go because he was Jewish. They did not want anyone Jewish in the French army. Things happened very quickly. the French Jews were not allowed to shop at certain times when the rest of the French people were shopping. By the time they went to the stores, there was nothing left for them. And also, Germany was taking all the food that France produced to send back to Germany. Their men were in the army. German men were in the army, and whatever other countries that they had taken over were producing was sent back to Germany. French Jews were not allowed to teach. They were not allowed to be lawyers or to go to the theater, own a bicycle or a radio. Things became really, really bad. And of course, my father had no work. We lived in a house, an apartment house, where we were the only Jews. And my father and mother became friendly with most of the neighbors. As a matter of fact, the mayor of the 3rd district where we lived in that apartment house, and was very, very good to my family. And as I said, my father lost his job. There was nothing that he could find. And finally, he heard about signing up to work in the French-German interest. And they gave him a paper that said that if he would agree to this, that his family would be protected, which really is not true, but he signed. And he was sent to a small town in the countryside in France called Clé. In Clé, there was a camp, a small camp, and there were about 70 Jews that were sent there to work as lumberjacks, to cut trees, because the Germans needed the wood. So these 70 men were very, very interesting. They were teachers, they were lawyers, they were, well, my father was a baker. He had learned to be a baker from his father, who had owned 2 bakeries in Berlin in the past. And so you had very interesting people there who were cutting trees. And my mother was in Paris with me. Things were getting very bad. She was not able to get food. Food was scarce. She was lucky in one way that one of her neighbors, who used to make costumes for the theater, asked her to work for her. My mother was a dressmaker, had learned dressmaking in Berlin. And so she was able to earn a little bit of money. And pretty soon, you could not even walk the streets in France without being picked up by the French police, by the way, not the Germans. And you had to wear a star. And if you had this star on your coat, when you took off the coat, you better have another one. And the star had to be purchased. It was purchased at the police station. So every Jew had to go to the police station and buy one of these stars and sew it on their coat. And pretty soon, people were arrested. My aunt, my uncle, and my 2 cousins were arrested. They were sent to Auschwitz, where my uncle and my aunt were gassed immediately. My two cousins survived for about 2 weeks. One was 19 and one was 12. Things really were getting bad and my parents were getting very scared. And my father, who was in the camp working, after work, he and the other men used to go to the little farms that were around there and buy some food and send it back to the families. And he became a very good friend with one of the farmers. He used to go there every night. And the farmer's name was Monsieur Martin. And he would go to the farm and he would help him with chores. One day he said to him, I have a little girl. You know what is happening. She's almost 4. And my wife and I are terrified for her. And would you hide her? Monsieur Martin said, I don't know. My family will be in danger. I don't know. I have to talk to my wife. And he said, I'll let you know tomorrow. My dad went the next day and Monsieur Martin said, I've spoken to my wife. We have 3 daughters. We will have 4. I don't know how many people would do such a thing. It was putting the entire family in danger because if they were found out, they could be shot and they could also be sent to concentration camps. Many people were for helping Jews, but many people did help. Not enough, but some did. So my father got in touch with my mom, and although it must have been a terribly hard thing for my mother to decide to give up her child, she knew that in order to save this child's life, she had to do this. So it was too dangerous for my mom to bring me to the farm. So one of our neighbors, a good friend, was to take me. And I was told, and this I remember, I can't tell you times. I have no conception of time, but there are certain things that are very vivid in front of my eyes. And I was told that I would be on a train and I would go with Monsieur Rafa and that I was not to talk. And if somebody asked me, I was to tell them that this was my dad. I remember the train station. I remember seeing soldiers with guns and I remember being on the train and no one asked me any questions. And I got to the farm and my dad was waiting and I adored my dad. And that made things okay, even though my mom wasn't there. And we ate dinner and French people and farmers always have wine and beer on the table, not beer, excuse me, hard cider on the table. And I guess I was very thirsty and I became a little bit inebriated and they put me to bed. The next morning, Monsieur Rafa was gone, my dad was gone, and I was with strangers. They were very good people. I was very, very lucky. They were very good to me. I followed Odile, who was the youngest child. She was 14, and followed her all around. Went to watch the cows in the fields, went to pick fruit on the trees. The Germans, each farm had to, every morning, the milk was be picked up for them. Every day. We were not allowed to kill an animal. It was always done in secret, a chicken or whatever, because they took everything. It was a very scary time. I didn't have school. I didn't have friends. I was not allowed to play with other children because they were afraid that, you know how children are, they talk. They were afraid that someone would find out that they were hiding a Jewish child. So as I say, I had no friends. I had no toys and played with pumpkin seeds. And that's how I learned how to count. Not a very happy little girl. I was quiet, not anymore. My dad used to come every night. That was the height of my day. There was a little path to the farm, and every night, and somehow I guess I felt it was time to go and wait at the end of that little path for my dad. Monsieur Martin had given him a bicycle, an old one. So he'd come riding up and he would be whistling a tune and would hold me and that was the height of my life. One day, all of a sudden, my mom was there. Don't know to this day how she got there. My mom never spoke after the war. She didn't want to speak about it. I don't know how she got there, but she was. And my dad stayed the night. We were family again. And the next morning, my dad went to the forest to do his job. All of a sudden, the door busted in and there are soldiers with guns and they're asking, where is Mr. Adler? Where is David Adler? And Monsieur Martin said he went to work. He's in the forest. If he is not back at the camp in 1 hour, we are coming back and we're taking all of you. They left. Monsieur Martin saddled his horse and went to the forest to tell my father. My father went back to the camp and my mother disappeared. I didn't see her until the end of the war. And my father, how did they punish him? They took his French citizenship away. And me, who had been born in France, they took my citizenship away. I still have the paper. And life went on at the farm. And one day, all of a sudden, I was playing in the yard, and I saw a truck, the guns, and at the end of the little path, I could see them. I ran in and brought me into the bedroom. It was a 2-room farmhouse, a bedroom, and everything else was in the other room. And she lifted the mattress, put me, at that time they had, it was like a spring. It wasn't like a box spring. And they put me face down on that spring. She put me and put the mattress on top. Don't move. Don't make a sound. They came into the house. They looked around. They came into the bedroom and found nothing. The only thing they did was take all the fruit, the food that they could take, and they left. And miracle, they didn't find me. As usual, one day I'm waiting at the end of the little path for my dad, and no bicycle. I'm waiting and waiting. He doesn't show up. And all of a sudden, Monsieur Martin, I see a horse and carriage coming very fast. And it's Monsieur Martin. And he stops and he grabs me and he says, they were taken. And as little as I was, as, you know, 4 years old, I knew. One of the things was that I knew the word Jewish. I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't know the meaning. The only thing that I knew is that there were people who wanted to do harm because I was Jewish, but I didn't know really what it meant. So that day, they were all taken, the 70 men. I guess they didn't need wood anymore. So they took them, and they took them to a railroad station. They were put on French trains, and they were brought to a place outside of Paris called Drancy. It was a holding camp. I don't know if too many people realize that there were many concentration camps in France. They were not death camps, but people died in them. So these men were taken, and after being in Drancy for a few weeks, they were all taken on convoy number 64 to Auschwitz. They were taken by French trains, the French railroad. The French railroad was in on everything. They were paid per head and per kilometer for every person that they brought to the camps. And not only Jews. There were gypsies, there were Black people, there were our soldiers, our American soldiers who were taken to concentration camps. The French took them. After that, I realized that I would not see my dad again. I didn't need to go to the end of the path because he wasn't going to come. However, as a little girl, I still did every night. And he never came.
Rosette, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm going to come back to you in
Yeah.
a minute. I want to circle back to Mary now and to talk a little bit about, and we're going to get to just the end of the war. And Mary, you told us a little bit about where you were in hiding. Tell us a little bit about your recollection of the end of the war. Where did you go? Was your family intact? And also tell us a little bit about how you met your beloved husband, Joe. May he rest in peace. We were all big fans of Joe. So if you could also include that information, we would love to hear about it.
Well, after January 28, when our part of Budapest was liberated, because it took a long time for the whole city to be free, my father, who was very fortunate, he survived forced labor and came toward Budapest with the Russian army. He was a teacher of Esperanto, which was a language made out of various languages, and enabled him to be able to make himself understand Russian. He came to Budapest and he found us, and he made plans that he was going to take us to a town that's already been stabilized. So we had to walk, took us a week, and it was February, and we had a sled. On top of the sled were suitcases. On top of the suitcases was a comforter. On top of the comforter was me, and on top of me was another comforter, and the whole thing was tied with ropes. And my mother pushed and my father pulled. At night, we slept in farmhouses. And after a week, we arrived in Nagykörös, which was already under Russian rule and no danger there. Stayed there for about a month or so. And then we went to Eger, to my grandmother's house, to find out what happened to her family. And there we found out that the whole family was taken to Auschwitz. And the day they arrived, everyone was murdered. My grandmother, my 6-month-old little cousin, aunts and uncles, they were all gone. So we stayed in Eger, and in the beginning of May, my father pricked his left thumb with a rusty nail, developed sepsis, was taken to the hospital, and on May 24th, 1944, after surviving all of that, he died because there was no medication. There were no antibiotics in those days, and whatever they used to heal sepsis was not available. So my mother and I, we stayed in Eger for a while. I got a private tutor who tutored me for 3rd grade, and for 4th grade, I went to the convent school. And after that, my mother and I went back to Budapest. And we made a life there. My mother at one point remarried. My stepfather was a good man. And I went to school. And eventually, well, of course, there was the Russian rule and the communist era, which is another story to talk about. It wasn't easy to manage life there. You had to learn, watch what you're saying, because 1,000 eyes were on you. And at one point, I went to school and became an optician. One Friday night, my stepfather went to temple and brought with him a young man that he knew because they were both in the sewing machine business. And my mother was a good cook. And so this Jewish young man, who was a very rare commodity, because I am part of a lost generation in Eastern Europe. Not too many people are alive from Eastern Europe who survived it all. So anyway, he liked the food, he liked the girl, and we started keeping company. And I didn't introduce him to any of my girlfriends because I didn't want to take a chance that somebody would steal him away from me. And in 1955, we got married. And in 1956, we had a baby, Peter. And there was a revolution in Hungary in 1956. And the Iron Curtain sprung a leak. And 150,000 people crossed the border illegally to Austria. We were among them. We put Peter in a basket and we walked through fields in December 1956 into Austria, and we ended in Vienna. And then we came to America. And we settled in Syracuse. I had another baby, Jack. We made a life. And at one point, Jack died. We lost him. And then 2 years ago, I lost Joe. We moved to Florida in the mid-80s. And that's the short and the long
Mary,
of it. We were lucky to come to America. We had a good life here.
Mary, we're going to hold you there, and because I'm going to have Rosette I'm going to have Rosette talk a little bit about what happened at the end of the war, and then I'm going to talk about how you two became linked together, and how many people mistake both of you for sisters. So Rosette, can you pick up it's true. Rosette, you shared with us the tragic story and the horrific story of your dad. Tell us a little bit about what happened at the end of the war. How were you reunited with your mom, and where did you go?
Well, the end of the war at the farm was amazing. I can still remember all of us at night going outside and seeing the planes, American planes in the sky. And we would come out, and one of the men who used to work there, who eventually married one of the girls, Georges, used to come out with an accordion and play the French national anthem. The house used to shake because bombs and everything else, but everyone was so grateful and so happy. And then my mother walked almost all the way from Paris to the farm to get me. And she knew already that my father wasn't going to come back. And I heard her talking to Monsieur Martin and realized also that my dad wouldn't be coming back. And it was really a sad time, but a happy time. I remember the American convoys coming through the town and giving us Hershey bars. One of the men my mother spoke to was Jewish, and one of the GIs, he wanted to take me inside the one of the tanks, and I was so frightened of uniforms. I just couldn't. And then my mother decided to take me back to Paris. And how did we go? We hitchhiked with American GIs. And the thing that I was so vivid is my mother and I and another couple with children was inside the Jeep. And our Jeep is pretty small, but they were all there. And then the driver was a young GI, and on the nose of that Jeep was a black American GI with a gun because there were still snipers in the woods. And he was out there sitting outside with this gun. And I never forget one thing. I had never seen a black man before. And here is this man with this gun. And it's something I never forgot, that he was protecting us. We finally got back to Paris. Paris was a shambles. It was just awful. Food was scarce. My mother was having a problem trying to work and keeping me at home. And finally, she heard about this Jewish home for children that had been gathered after the war, children who had lost both parents, children who had one parent. So she put me in this home, and I have to tell you that that's where I learned what Jewish meant. And I look back on this as one of the happiest times of my life. But most of the children had lost both parents. And after 6 months of being there, the children were taken to what is now Israel. And being that I still had my mother, I was sent home. From then, it became one foster home after another because my mother was having problems getting back to normal. And most of these places were not very good. And I think that it was one of the worst times of my life. And finally, we did find out that our family, some of our family had survived. And when one of my aunts was in America, and my grandmother went to America in 1946, I think. And we could not go because I got measles. So I wasn't allowed to go, and that was 1946. And again, my mother, tried working, and we had this one-room apartment. And she asked the Martin family if they would take me back. So I went back. And I lived with them for, I don't know exactly the length of time. I know I went to school there. And then my mother decided with my aunt to send me to America. 1949. I went back to Paris, and I left. My mother put me on a train to Cherbourg, which was still bombed out. And I was put on a ship called the Queen Elizabeth. And I was all by myself. By that time, I was 10 and a half. And I was on this ship for 5 days and sick to my stomach. And if it wasn't for the steward taking care of me, I don't know what would have happened because I was all by myself. I got here, and my aunt and other family that I didn't know were waiting for me. Didn't speak a word of English. And I went to live with my aunt in Manhattan. And my aunt had no children, never been married. Rough time. She put me in school the following week. And the children in school were wonderful. I must have had a teacher who explained to them, whatever I was. And she put me in school, and then I went to camp. By the time I came back from camp, I was speaking English. And I loved Manhattan. I loved America. This country, there is nothing like it.
So,
My mother joined us 2 years later. And because I wasn't going back to France, I wrote her that I would not come back. Even at the age that I was. And I guess she had to come. So that was my introduction to the United States, my country. I don't need my French citizenship. They can keep it.
so Rosette, I'm going to ask you to pause there.
Yes.
And because we only have a few minutes left, I want to kind of get a sense of, I said before jokingly, but amongst us that know you both, it's a common phrase of that they often, people will often mistake you both as sisters. How did you guys meet? And another question that I have is, another joke we have amongst many of us is when you need a dose of positivity, that. And Mary jokes about it all the time too. So Mary, can you tell us how the two of you met? And then Rosette, tell me how you stay positive, particularly during these challenging times. Mary.
Well, we moved to Florida in 1986, and sometime in the 1990s, I was introduced to this organization, Child Survivors and Children of the Holocaust, and I joined. And one of the things that we do is we go to schools and we talk to children about our experiences. And Rosette was a member as well. And that's how we met. And then over the years, we kind of gelled. And then since this pandemic, we have a situation, three of us, that every morning we text to one another to make sure we are alive. And then, of course, these texts sometimes funny, sometimes serious, sometimes politics, sometimes jokes. But every morning we are in touch. And then Rosette and I, we took a class at one point at the temple, at the Orthodox temple, Kabbalah. We went to Kabbalah together. And then everybody there thought that we were sisters. And that's how the whole myth had started. I think she's too pretty. I don't look like her. But I considered it a compliment. I considered it a compliment when they thought I was her sister. But this is what happened. We have so much in common, even with our. We think alike because of our childhood experiences, and that makes a difference. When you're a child, the impressions that you receive as a child about your life stays with you, and it colors your views, and you appreciate your life more.
I agree. Well, you both complement one another for sure. So Rosette, tell us a little bit about the inside joke that we have of a dose of positivity. Many of us really, when we just can't anymore, will call you and somehow, even during these challenging times, you're able to remain optimistic and maintain an optimistic outlook on life. Tell us what your secret is.
First of all, Mary is the one who tells the best jokes. I have to say that.
I'm not surprised. That does not surprise me.
She has a great outlook on life. Mary is treasurer of our organization. I am secretary. And I had joined the organization back in Long Island, New York, when before I came here. Mary and I went on Marching and Living, and Joe, who I adored, went with us. And from then on, I think the friendship really started. And I want you to know that although I have many friends who did not go through the Shoah, there is something between us that we gravitate to one another, because we can talk about things that we only can understand, we only can feel, and we cannot talk that way with people who have not gone through it. It's not fair to them. So that's one reason that we all seem to gravitate to each other. As far as me being positive, well, maybe it's because I lived in a world where Jews were not supposed to live, and I survived. I came to this country and I was reborn. I have children and grandchildren who I adore, and they have achieved, and they share my love for this country and for the state of Israel. When I accompany young people on the March of the Living, I see in their eyes the commitment to remember so this doesn't happen again, and the joy they feel when they get to Israel. So why wouldn't I be positive? I'm positive about the future. And like everything else, what is happening now, this too shall pass. And we have to be strong and do the best we can, and love and appreciate our friends, appreciate what we have. Every morning I get up and I say, the one thing I say to myself is, thank God for today, thank God for what I have.
So I think now everyone knows exactly why we call Rosette for the pep talk when things are challenging, because she just gave it to everyone. So I want you to know how much I appreciate that, and how much we all appreciate that positive outlook. So I have one final question to you, and Rosette, you touched on it a little bit, but I do want to give Mary a chance to answer it as well. You both participated in you both traveled on the March of the Living several times, and both of you have participated in the From March to Miriam program, which connects you with local teens for the purpose of being able to share your experiences and to make sure that our Jewish future is strong. But it's not easy. It comes at a price. It's difficult. It's challenging. What motivates and inspires both of you to speak in schools and with our teens on the March of the Living about your experiences during the war? What inspires you to do so? Mary?
Years ago, I went through a period that I was full of questions about my childhood and the Shoah. And I asked myself, why did I survive? What's the reason that I survived? And then I came to the realization that I survived, and I am surviving because I have a task. I have to tell the generations that coming up, Jewish and non-Jewish, about the Shoah. I have to warn them what can happen when hate takes over. And I have to give them a task to tell their children and grandchildren that the Shoah did happen, and that they met someone who went through it. And this is why I went to the March of the Living. Was the best experience in my life. It's amazing to see this young, privileged most of the time, even the ones who are not so coming less affluent homes, they are still better off than children in another country. And all these kids come and how they change. And by the end of the show, when they realize what happened, and most of them are Jewish, and they learn what it is to be a Jew and what is their duty to be and to do. And they become different people. And there is nothing that's more satisfying than to see that transformation. And also the love that they show you during the trip is very heartwarming. And that's why I do it.
Well, Mary and Rosette, you have both influenced countless teens, both on the march and through your speaking engagements, in local schools. So I want you to know how much those teens appreciate you and how much we all appreciate your willingness to share. So I want you to know that. Really, thank you. Rosette, I know you touched on it a little bit when you spoke before, but what really does inspire you to continue speaking to our local teens and
Mary,
on the march?
Mary mentioned, I think that all of us ask ourselves, why did we survive? And I don't think that I realized what I had to do until 1985. 1985, I went to Germany. I went to the place where my father had his last days. My father was murdered on April 6, 1945, 5 days before the Americans came in. I went there, and I knew that my father had been put into a mass grave because that's what they did the few days before. And I said Kaddish. And when I was walking in this place, this horrible place, it was wintertime and the wind was howling and it was just horrible. My mother was with me, by the way. And I said Kaddish, and all of a sudden it was very quiet. And it was almost like I knew, like something was telling me, go back and talk. Because before that, and I think Mary will back me on that people used to say when we came to the United States, don't think about it anymore. Don't talk. Forget it. You're alive. There were no psychiatrists that took care of us. There was nothing. So everything was within. And we held it. And this was the time to just let it go. And that's when I started to talk. And the more I did, the more I realized that surviving was for this. For making sure that these young people know and that they'll be our voices. Because, we're at an age where who knows what tomorrow will bring. And they will know what to say because they have to accept our legacy. This is a legacy we're giving them. And they will. I see it. I see it every time I speak. And I see it every time I go on the March of the Living. That's why I've been on 6 of them.
Well, we appreciate it. And Mary and Rosette, I want to thank you both for joining us for this panel discussion this morning. We sincerely appreciate your willingness to share your testimony and for speaking about your lives, both past and present. You two are extraordinary women, and we are so fortunate that you have joined us this morning. I also want to thank Amy Wildstein, Assistant Director of the Broward March of the Living, and Michelle Archambault, Program Associate for the March of the Living Southern Region. This program would not be possible without their help and organization. And a very special thank you to the Jewish Federation of Broward Marketing Department for their technical help this morning and their training. Please join us on January 27th at 7 p.m. for the International Holocaust Memorial Day for our next speaker, who will be Dr. Bernd Vollschlager. He will speak about his experiences growing up in Germany in the shadow of his father, a highly decorated World War II German tank commander. He later converted to Judaism, immigrated to Israel, and served with a distinction in the Israeli Defense Forces. So you won't want to miss out on that program. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all on January 27th. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.